going on, everybody? I'm DJ Sixsmith. You're watching The Sit Down. Look who's here. Laura Prepon. Brand new book, You and I as Mothers. What's going on, Laura?
Hi, DJ. Thanks for having me, man. This is really cool.
You got it. So you are promoting a book in the midst of a global pandemic. How's that going so far?
Yes. Well, what I can say is that it's so great that we are in the future because now we're able to do a virtual book tour and I can talk to you like we're doing right now, which is great. It's interesting putting out something like this during the pandemic, but I got to say, it's so much of my book is about building community and making sure that you're supported. And in the time of the self-isolation and the social distancing, I'm so happy the book is coming out in the middle of all this because I really hope it helps people feel less alone, much like it did for me while I was writing it.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool that you're tackling a bunch of really important issues, not just for mothers, but for families as well. So I think it's one thing to write about this and make it public. When did you really get a grasp of your feelings that you were feeling isolated and having some identity issues and really just grappling with the whole thing as being a mother for the second time?
I feel like there's all these books about pregnancy, right? There's all of these resources during those 9 months. And then after the 9 months, I couldn't find a voice to turn to who I felt like I could empathize with, who would make me feel less alone. I feel like there were all these books about parenting, but there was nothing for me, the woman herself who's going through this. And I felt like there was a really big void and there was a conversation that wasn't happening in terms of the stress that we deal with as mothers of all ages, by the way. The lack of control that we have, mom guilt, self-care, all of these different things I was struggling with. And when I spoke to other mom friends of mine, they were all struggling with the same thing, but maybe in a different way. As example, like I interview a group of amazing, eccentric, eclectic women of all backgrounds and professions in my book that I call my Mom Squad. And that is because I wanted all these different viewpoints, but on this same subject, so that anybody reading the book can get something out of it. So between my boots on the ground experience thus far and their experience and all these tips and tricks, it really is helping a lot of people. And I just felt like this resource wasn't out there. And I wrote the book that I wanted, and fortunately people are really loving it. So I'm very, very thankful because I'm so proud of it.
That's awesome. What was the biggest challenge of writing the book for you?
One of the biggest challenges of writing the book for me was I felt like when I became a mother, I naturally looked back at how I was raised. And because I needed resources. So naturally I looked to that. And for the first time in my life, I came into confrontation with the way that I was raised. And I had never really thought about it before because I had always been very career driven. I was out of the house at a young age. I've been a working professional since I was 15. And I had never really thought about becoming a mother or having children until my husband and I got together. And I'd never really, come face to face with breaking down how I was raised. And having to do that was not easy. And it was a really healing and eye-opening experience for me because there was a lot of dysfunction that was passed down, as well as a lot of amazing things that were passed down. And we all came from a mother figure. We all have a relationship or not with that person, and which still affects us. If you don't have a relationship, or if you do, you're affected in some way. And I felt like being able to really analyze that and break it down to how it's affecting me now as a person and a mother was really eye-opening for me and empowering, because as a parent, we get to choose what we pass down. We get to choose what we leave behind and what we can pass down to our kids. And as for me, as the mother and as the woman, that was really empowering for me. And I hope that it empowers the reader as well to do the same thing. And that's just one of the eye-opening examples that happened.
I think that's really interesting because I think it's tough to look at your past regardless of what happened. And also to do it at an older age, I think is pretty interesting too, because you've had some life experience, you have kids, you probably looked at things a little bit differently now than you would have, say, 10 years ago, based on where you're at in your life.
Absolutely. It's like night and day. It's literally like night and day. So to be able, but to your point, which is so true, having to look at that now was really eye-opening. It was really, really eye-opening. And I write about it all in my book. It's been interesting and really healing, I gotta say. And some days, I mean, look, it's a constant negotiation. Relationships with your parents are it's so complex.
It doesn't matter what age it is; they're just complex.
I mean, seriously, it's so complex. So doing that was just such an eye opener for me. Yeah, and that's just one of the things I write about. There's so many wonderful things that I can't wait for people to read.
So you mentioned the fact that you were 15 when you got this thing going. Like, take me back to like before that 70s show hits. Like, where were you at? What were you doing? You know, what did life look like for you?
I had a very kind of unconventional upbringing. I mean, first of all, in a nutshell, youngest of 5 kids, grew up in Jersey, and we never had any rules. It really, what we call it, Wild Kingdom. I mean, my sisters and I were like, that was Wild Kingdom. How the hell did we survive that? But we did. And, you know, my mother was this wonderfully eccentric woman, and passed down a lot of dysfunction, but also passed down a lot of great things, like learning to speak up for myself and not conforming to a status quo, which is great. I mean, I do have a very unconventional life, and my job is very unconventional, and I thrive in that kind of thing. But when I was 15, I was out of the house. I moved to a foreign country. I lived there by myself for a year and a half. Again, because we had such a different kind of upbringing. When I was 15 and said I wanted to move to Europe by myself, my mom was like, okay.
Wow.
Not kidding. So I moved to Italy, and I lived in Italy for a year. And then I hopped around to, you know, France, and did a stint in Brazil. And I, you know, kind of went all over. And then I figured out that I wanted to try this acting thing. And then my mom said, okay, what do we have to do? And I said, I got to learn how to act. So then that kind of, we opened the yellow pages. Literally, I came home back to Jersey, flipped open the big book, and I pointed to an acting coach in New York City, and I started taking acting lessons, and within a year I booked that 70 show. And wow. when I was 18, I moved to LA, and I was like, it doesn't matter. They speak English there. I'll be able to understand the language. And while I loved living abroad, you know, not only did I learned enough of the language to get by, but my Jersey accent was really, really tough. It was. So I remember, DJ, I'm not kidding. I remember when I was in France. I was in Paris, and I was by myself. So I wanted to go sightsee and see some things. I'm 15 years old. So I have a map, and I pointed to the Champs-Élysées, which is a very, you know, the arches. And as a kid, I looked at that, and I read it, and I went up to someone, and I said, can you tell me how to get to the Champs-Élysées? Because the way that Champs-Élysées, I thought it was the Champs-Élysées.
Oh, man. That's great.
They looked at me as if I did something terrible. I was so mortified. But I was 15 from Jersey, and my accent was so strong. Like, I wasn't Laura, I was Laura. You know, stuff like that. Like, my accent was really, really strong. And that was a major learning curve, and I quickly learned that one. But regardless, I started acting, and I booked that 70 show. When I moved to LA at 18, that's how everything started.
So what was the biggest surprise when you started on that 70 show? Because that was a long run. You guys did like, what, 200 episodes or something ridiculous?
Yes.
Like that? Which is amazing when you think about it.
I think we did over 200 episodes.
Say it again. What was most rewarding?
Well, I think we did over 200 episodes, but I think for me, it was being able to have the good fortune, especially now as a director, being able to have this boots on the ground experience of, I had no idea what I was doing when I booked that 70 show. And because Donna Pinciotti was so similar to who I was, there was like this thing in me as a person that was so Donna and so Donna's core, that it was the fact that I didn't know how to act. It didn't really matter because Donna was so me, and it was such like a glove I could just fly right into, and it fit perfectly. And that was really great being my first role because David Traynor, who was our director, directed every single episode except for the pilot,
Wow.
which was directed by a man named Terry Hughes. David Traynor was like our father figure. He was my mentor. He's so wonderful. And I learned so much just, first of all, watching how he dealt with all of us. Because while our cast was incredible, we're all very different. And seeing a director be able to handle a bunch of kids whose personalities are all so different, he did such a beautiful job. I learned so much by watching him deal with us as actors. So as a director, I learned a ton. And I learned how to act on that show. We all did. So having that boots on the ground experience for 8 years every day was a blessing. It was just such a learning experience and such a blessing, and it was so wonderful. I couldn't have asked for a better job. It was amazing. And then, you know, as I got older, doing all these other jobs, and then my next long running series being Orange is the New Black was just, I'm so fortunate to have been a part of these amazing staple shows that were groundbreaking at the time. It's just so great.
Yeah, I love the story about Orange because it's like nobody knew what Netflix was. It was like, oh, we're going to do this show on a web series. Like, what was your experience with it when you first auditioned for the part?
Well, what's crazy is look at how people are consuming their entertainment now. I mean, it's all streaming, especially now with the social distancing and the, you know, the self-isolation. It's all streaming. And when we first started Orange, you're right. Nobody knew what it was. We were like, what is this web series? But when I was already a fan of Jenji Kohan's, and when I read her pilot was like a beacon out of all of the material that would come to you as an actor. And I, you know, out of all the scripts that were sitting there and whatever, you learn quickly when something is really special. You know, I've had the good fortune to be able to do this for over 20 years. So pretty quickly you can tell, like, okay, this is a special project. And I started reading it. I couldn't put it down. I was obsessed with the role of Alex. I was just like, I have to do this. Like, it was just something in my gut. I'm just like, I have to do this. And I had no idea what Netflix was. And as soon as Taylor and I read together for the first time, because I was in LA and I came to New York to read with Taylor, it was just this kismet, amazing thing. And we just knew it. We just knew it. We knew it. We knew it was something special. And all of us, including Netflix, by the way, they did not micromanage anything. They just let us go. They let Jenji do her vision of it. They let us do our interpretations of the role. Because my role is based on a real, you know, this is a true story. Obviously, when a true story goes to entertainment, it takes off into all these other storylines, and then it starts changing, obviously. But, you know, a lot of our characters were based on real characters, if not all of us. And so to be able to do my own version of this story was having that creative freedom, and Jenji being able to do her creative freedom. Netflix was just let us do our thing, and it was, I mean, look at what it became. It's just incredible.
That's really cool. And Alex, that character, I mean, is fascinating, super complicated. What was most intriguing about playing that role?
But the thing I loved about Alex was that similar and then not similar to someone like Donna Pinciotti on 70 Show, as I said, it was like a glove that I put on and I was so her. And then having been in this industry for a while and all the experience I've had and all the learning I've done, by the time Alex came to me, I was so ready to take her on. I loved playing her. There were so many things that, again, were so me. And then there were so many things that were not. I've never smuggled drugs across international borders.
Check that one off the list.
So yeah, exactly. There were many things, but she's such a phenomenal character to play and an important character to play. So many women felt represented by Alex. That means so much to me that a show like Orange is out there and that so many types of women were represented and accepted, and that other, you know, people watching that show felt seen and heard was so important to us. And I don't want to speak for anybody else, but for me, it was so important. And She's a badass, man. I love
She
her.
really is.
I miss her. Like our last season came out, in June or July. I miss her. But she's on streaming forever. She's there, and I can't tell you how many people, I'm very involved with my social media community. I can't tell you how many people are re-binging it again during all this that's going on, and it's great.
Well, I think that's the beauty of social media is that people can follow along now. Like, can you imagine your life at that 70s show with Twitter and Instagram? Like, that would have been bonkers, right?
Tell me about it. It's this whole thing. We are in the future. I mean, it is just surreal. And thank goodness, because especially now, community is so important. So being able to not only have social media to connect with people, but also stuff like this, being able to see a friend that you want to call and see their face and be able to hang out and have a conversation is really important. Thank goodness we have the technology to do that.
Definitely. You've mentioned the directing thing a couple of times. I know that's been a big part of things for you. When did that start to pique your interest, and what fascinates you the most about directing?
I've been directing since I was a kid. I mean, as I said, on that 70s show, I would follow David around, our director, and I was just always very curious about it. I would ask a ton of questions. I would talk to the crew all the time, and I was just always really fascinated. And I started directing. My first movie I ever did was this little independent movie that nobody's ever seen, and we filmed in Coleman, Alabama, and I was the female lead. And it was very indie. And I remember one day I saw this group of guys standing around, because they were all guys, and a group of guys standing around with a camera. And I went to my director and I said, who are those group of guys? Because again, I always ask questions. I was always really curious. And he said, well, that's the second unit. And I was like, well, why are they standing around? And he said, because my second unit director quit, and it was his first movie, and he was like totally, nervous. And I said, okay, great. I'm off the next couple days. Give them to me and I'll go get the shot. And he said, do you know how to direct? And I was like, of course. I had no idea, but I had watched the trainer on 70 show. I'm like, I could do this. So I was like, of course. So the next morning I got a shot list of 16 shots, and it was like all the B-roll stuff, like, when you see a movie and it's like the car driving down, or like the beautiful sunset shot, or, you establish the tone of the movie. I got 16 shots of different things like that. So I went out with the guys, we jumped in a van, and my first thing on the list was I needed a beautiful shot of a guy on a tractor, to intercut with the opening scene with the music and establishes the town. And we're driving, and I saw some guy in a tractor, and I'm like, pull over. And they pulled over, and I'm like, I know he has to sign something. So I hand wrote a consent form.
Oh my gosh.
I ran up to the guy. He signed it. He signed this handwritten note, and he let us film him on his tractor. And it was a beautiful shot. It ended up in the movie. And then I had to do like 16 of those, and, like a chicken farm, the water tower, all these different things. And it was great. And my director saw the footage, and he said, great, you're the second unit director now.
Wow.
So that's how I started. And my crew, my little second unit crew, they were like, we were all transplants from LA, and they were like, the first thing you direct, we're going to be your crew. Came home, wrote a short film, directed it. They were my crew.
Wow.
And it was just, and the DP actually who did my short film, he's become like an amazing DP now. He's doing all these like amazing movies. Not because he started on by no way am I saying because he started on my short film, but it was just funny because we all, you do these little indie projects, and then now, we all have your career, and it's just so interesting. But that's how when I see his name on stuff, I'm like, oh my God, Brandon. So it's great. I mean, that's how I started. And then I was just like, I would go to film school at night. I did not stop. Like after I filmed that 70 show, I would go to film school at night. And my directing teacher ended up producing my second short film. Then I started doing a web series where I was like a one-woman crew. Like I've been just learning and learning and learning, teaching myself to edit, and that was one of the biggest tools for me, was teaching myself to edit was a huge game changer for me. And even like, as example, like your audience at home watching right now is like the perfect time to learn a new craft or hone
Totally.
in on something new, because if there's something that you don't normally have time to do because of your job or whatever, I know we're working, you know, if you're fortunate enough to work from home, it's again very busy. Being a stay-at-home parent is very busy. I get it. But for your audience out there that can, now's the perfect time to learn something new and get good at it, you know, so then when you go back out, you can have that extra tool like sharpen. So anyway, it just reminded me of that. But that's how I started, man. I just was like learning. And as soon as Orange started, I was on Genji, like I want to direct, and I did not give up. And then finally I got my shot, and it was great.
That's really cool and great advice there. And speaking of advice, when people check out your book, what are the big things you want them to take away and learn?
There's so many wonderful things that I cover in the book that I was struggling with, that now people who are reading the book they feel there's tools there for them. And one of the things that was really important, besides just sharing personal anecdotes and really dropping my defenses and sharing these truths, that is really new for me, because normally I'm a very private person. My husband and I are very private. And I felt that to really have this much needed conversation about motherhood, I wanted to open up and be vulnerable about a lot of this stuff. And it really is starting a conversation, which is amazing, and with people who have already read the book. And there's so many things I write about, honestly, from what I was dealing with the stress levels and the lack of control now that your children are out in the world, the mom guilt that I had about going back to work and how to negotiate that. And I also have an entire chapter about food, of course, and cooking and recipes, because that's a huge part of my life. But yeah, there's so many one of the main things that I wanted to accomplish with this book is not only telling these stories and talking to my mom squad who are sharing stories and advice at all different phases of motherhood, but it was that you have these stories and connecting with myself and these women, but it's also, I wanted to make sure the reader got tools, because especially now, I wanted not only the empathy and to be able to connect with the readers, but also to have a takeaway. At the end of every chapter, I give tools for dealing with that specific thing. And that's one thing that I really wanted to make sure came across. And people who are reading the book now, they're using the tools. I did an interview yesterday where the woman had just finished doing this breathing exercise that I share in it, because she was having a stressful day covering COVID on her news program. So there's just all of these different tools and takeaways that were really important to me, because if you're going to sit down and take the time to read my book, which I so appreciate, I want to make sure that there's going to be things that are going to help you in your life. And apparently that's happening. So thank you.
That's really awesome. Well, thank you for starting the conversation. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll talk to you down the road, Laura.
Thanks, DJ. Thanks for having me.